Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back, and we'll get into the book in a moment. We were just talking about Amazon. It feels like that's what's on everybody's lips in New York. You recently commented on the whole Amazon deal. Where do you stand on it?
Well, I have some concerns. I mean, I'm glad they recognize that New York is the greatest city in the world, and we have some of the greatest workforce you could possibly ever want. But I'm concerned there wasn't a lot of community input.
Right.
And we paid a great deal of money, which, unfortunately, we still have families all across Queens, all across New York, who are struggling to make ends meet. So I have some concerns.
It's an interesting dilemma for politicians to be in, where you're always trying to balance the game of pleasing corporations and then also pleasing people on the ground. When you look at a situation like this, with Amazon, with what's happening with Mayor de Blasio and Cuomo, people are saying you didn't listen to us, and they're saying, no, but we did this for the people.
Right. But the problem is they gave so many financial incentives
Right.
to the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest companies in the world, and built a helipad for the wealthiest man in the country.
Right.
I mean, it's absurd that taxpayer dollars went for that kind of investment when we as New Yorkers know how much investment we need in our infrastructure. We need better subways. We need to be able to get work on time. So it's just a comparison of how much was offered and the fact that we have so many other urgent needs right now.
That's an interesting conversation that I think Democrats are going to be having going forward now. Yeah. The conversation of money versus politics. The Democrats have won the House. The Democrats are picking up more and more seats every single day. It seems like there was, in fact, a blue wave. Going forward, there has been talk of a few ideas the Democrats are pushing forward, and one of those key ones has been getting money out of politics. Is that a realistic idea?
I think it's the most important thing we could try to do, because everything that you want to accomplish, no matter what it is, the reason why it's so hard is because how much money the special interests, the wealthiest corporations, spend on politics, and it distorts outcomes.
Right.
It's really not only soft corruption, but sometimes hard corruption. And so if we want to guarantee health care as a right and not a privilege, well, then you have to take on the drug companies and you have to take on the insurance companies. If you want to end gun violence in this country, you've got to take on the NRA and the gun manufacturers that fund it.
Right.
So it's important, I think, for all of us to understand that connection between money and politics, and we have to restore our democracy to the people. You have to really break up the current system and say we need publicly funded elections, we need greater transparency and accountability, because you have to get this overwhelmingly powerful influence that the most powerful moneyed interests have in outcomes. You know, this last tax bill, there's no better example, written in the dead of night by the special interests, even Republican members saying, oh, we have to get this bill passed because our donors will be furious if we don't.
Right.
So the truth is, you really got to get money out of politics. So I'm glad that it's something that we're going to start talking about, passing reforms, and continue the conversation with the American people.
Do you feel like laws will be passed? Do you feel like the Democratic House will be able to work with a Republican Senate and with the Republican president?
I think it's possible, and you have to try. You just have to keep putting those ideas out there. And if you bring it to the people, they know that our democracy is broken, and they know that the system's rigged, and that the most powerful have such an outsized influence.
Right.
So they're going to be behind it, and they'll be behind it no matter where you live, whether it's a red state or a blue state or a purple state. People want to have their voices restored. And that's really what this book is about. It's what the last election was about, that our right to vote, our voting rights, our ability to be heard, our democracy only works when regular people stand up and demand it. And so that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because it tells the story about how women actually earned the right to vote and what they had to do to get there. And so we cannot lose sight of how important that right is. And so not only money out of politics, but also voting rights.
It is a powerful book that's come out at a very timely moment. You have more women going into Congress than ever before. Predominantly on the Democratic side. And this book, Bold and Brave, 10 Heroes Who Won Women the Right to Vote. It's a beautiful book, and it seems like it's for children, but I was reading it and I was learning things. And
you would. So
you genuinely do, though.
Yes. So you wouldn't know, I mean, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, we've heard of those suffragists. But do we know what important roles Sojourner Truth played in actually getting the right to vote? Because she was one of the first to talk about the intersectionality between black women who had to not only abolish slavery first, but then also needed to get the right to vote, to be heard, to have control over their lives. And so Sojourner was so amazing because she put that issue squarely in the movement in one of the first women's rights conventions in Akron, Ohio. So she was a forerunner to other suffragists who came later who carried that banner, Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. Same with Harriet Tubman. I mean, she escaped slavery and then went back to get other slaves free. And she never gave up. And what made her journey so powerful to me is just the pure empathy she had for the people that she was fighting for.
Right.
She said, I've heard their cries, I've heard their screams, I've felt their pain, and I would give every drop of my blood to free them. I mean, that was the unbelievable strength and courage to put herself in danger every day. And then after all that, she went on and did speeches around the country for suffrage.
Do you think it's ever a bit of a paradox, or do you find it perplexing that many women who vote today, specifically, let's say, for the Republican Party, vote in a way that many would consider against their best interests? So, for instance, you look at Brian Kemp in Georgia. You look at how many white women voted for him. You look at the Republican Party itself. You look at all of the votes that we saw in the midterms, and it looks like many white women are saying, yes, we're with you as women, but that doesn't mean that our vote has to go that way. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between how the Democratic Party connects with many women of color and how many white women in America go, no, this is not the party for us?
Well, I think it's a really difficult question, to be honest, because they really are voting against their interest. But what's changing that is the women who are running, who are so inspiring that they are still winning. Like the fact that you have Stacey Abrams running in Georgia, if she could win this election, she was the first black woman governor ever in our country's history. And now she's demanding that every vote be counted. Transformational women like Kirsten Sinema winning in a red state of Arizona. First bisexual woman to be elected to the U.S. Senate, who grew up in poverty, who actually knew what it was like to be homeless. Part of her life, she lived in an abandoned gas station. So when she comes to the U.S. Senate, she's going to shake things up. So I do think things are changing, and it's changing because of the number of women who turned out to vote. It's also the number of women who decided to run, and the number of women of color who are running. It's exponentially different than in the past.
Before I let you go, one of the most important questions everyone wants to ask you is whether or not you're running in 2020. Now, that's a question I've heard you answer over and over again. What interests me more is what you think the plan will be when the Democrats have 100 people running for 2020. At what point do you think, as a person, you know that you should or should no longer be in a race? I know that's a tough question to ask because you haven't even said you're running yet, but is there a plan in place so that there isn't like a shit show where there's just 100 people on stage all fighting for scraps?
No.
There is no plan?
No.
Huh. Okay.
Not at all. But I think, for each person who will consider it, I think you just have to, for me, it's very much a moral question about whether you need to use your time and talents to serve the country in that way. Of course, I will fight for New Yorkers and serve New York, but I have to ask my own self, do I need to do this thing? Because this is a moment where people have to fight back with everything they have. And what President Trump has put out into the world is a lot of hate, a lot of division, a lot of anxiety. And all of us, you, me, everyone here is called to do something in this moment. And we just have to decide what our something is.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Bold and Brave is available now. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, everybody.